Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. A'udhu billahi minash shaitani rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I am Mohammed Ngubong and about to produce for you another podcast in which we are going to see what knowledge is in Islam. What is knowledge in Islam? Because although Muslims all over the world are giving a lot of importance to the search for knowledge, it is not really unanimous what knowledge is supposed to be. Knowledge to one person is considered to be something else, or ignorance by another. So in order to do things properly, we have to come into common terms as to what knowledge is to begin with, before we begin to see the relative importance. As a matter of fact, that is one of the main stumbling blocks which is preventing the spread and the progress of Islam and Muslims all over the world. You see, in the early days of Islam, every time the Muslims were attacked, because they only went to war when they were attacked, every time the Muslims were attacked, they were attacked with weapons, swords, arrows and bows, shields and things of that nature. And they also met with Muslims who possessed those things which they made themselves. Now, the war today is no longer with bows and arrows and swords. It's with fighter jets, fighter bombers, submarines, nuclear aircraft carriers, and so on. And in order to produce those things, certain types of knowledge are required. And because those things are required to defend Islam, those types of knowledge required to produce them automatically becomes part of the knowledge which the Muslims must acquire. You can perhaps argue that, well, it is something which Muslims must acquire collectively, but every Muslim must not be able to have that particular knowledge. Well, of course, no one can be a specialist of everything. Nevertheless, to keep insisting that what knowledge is theological knowledge is one of the biggest blunders which Muslims have been induced by their enemies to undertake. I wouldn't get into the historical reasons why that came to be. Suffice it to say that it was engineered by one of the staunch enemies of Islam. So in general terms, one can say that knowledge is a light which shines from the lamp of understanding. Knowledge is a light which shines from the lamp of understanding. So when it shines, it illuminates us from within, from without, and shines all around us. This makes us to have the best perception and understanding of our existence and our consciousness, meaning our spiritual body. In this, we move closer and closer to the ultimate truth, because the ultimate truth is like an ideal which we can acquire at infinity, given that it is only the Creator who has the ability to actually discern the totality of the truth. We can only get a deformed version depending on our level of awareness and consciousness. So by having the proper knowledge, we can have the best perception of that truth which we can have at this particular level of our capacity and capability. Note, though, that having said that, and having given our limitations, we all have a lens through which things are deformed. Given our limitations, we can describe that truth as a point at the center of a circle. And points of view pointing towards it come from every point on the circumference of that circle which is drawn around the truth. You can actually extend this into 3 dimensions and consider the truth as a point at the center of a sphere, and points of view point towards that truth from every point on the surface of this sphere. You see then that the truth will have an infinite number of perspectives, an infinite number of ways of expression. So we must not become rigid and start arguing with someone else who is seeing the truth from another angle and blatantly say he's wrong and think that everybody must look through our tiny little lens. We can consider a small example which can perhaps illustrate this. It is the so-called the fable of the elephant. 5 blind people came into a certain area where they were presented an elephant. One of them touched the trump, that is the tubular form which is on the face going down, with which the elephant drinks water. And the way it was moving, he felt that the trump of the elephant is like a snake. The second person, when he reached his hand to touch the elephant in order to make a picture, to have an idea of what the elephant is like, he touched the ears. And he said the elephant is like the leaf of cocoyams. The third person touched the stomach, that is the body of the elephant. And he thought that the elephant is like a wall. And the fourth person touched the feet of the elephant, the legs, one of the legs. And he said that the elephant is like a tree. And the last person got hold of the tail of the elephant. And he came to the conclusion that the elephant is like a rope. So then, if you ask the question, which one of these people was correct? The answer is, given their limitations, there is a way they can all be correct. But you see, if instead of arguing with one another, one saying the elephant is like the leaf of a cocoyam, the other one says it's like a tree, the other one says like a rope, they're not going to get anywhere. If they should come together and say, let us try and imagine a structure, a 3-dimensional structure, which can enable all of us to be right. The particular image which they will come up with now will be closer to the elephant than each of their individual perspectives. That is the way we must consider the truth. We must get another person's difference, not as a need for fighting, going to war, but as a way of enriching our perspective and in augmenting something on the way we see the truth. When we come closer and closer to the ultimate truth, then we're going to have the best thoughts, the best attitudes, the best feelings, the best sayings and self-talk within our body, and naturally also the best actions. Knowing that actions are things which characterize or defines our well-being. You see, we must control our thoughts, because thoughts can become words. We must control our words, because words can become actions. We must be very careful with our actions, because our actions can become habits. We must analyze our habits constantly, because that will make up our character. And we must check and scrutinize our character carefully, because that becomes our destiny. The Almighty Himself says He does not change the condition of a people unless the people change what is in them, meaning that what manifests itself around us comes from within. And the thoughts, attitudes, feelings, sayings, and self-talk, as well as actions and so on, are the things which are within. So our perception and the way we see knowledge can directly influence what kind of life we lead. Knowledge isn't just gathering information and memorizing it, nor gathering information and writing or recording in any other form. If that was so, then the most knowledgeable people or things in this world would be computers, DVD players, and things of that nature. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Almighty Creator, He elevated those who have knowledge. You can see this in the 58th Surah, verse 11. وَالَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْإِلْمَ دَرَجَاتٍ وَاللَّهُ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ خَبِيرٌ. And those with knowledge, Allah has elevated. He is well aware of everything we do. Unfortunately, in our community, we have changed those verses, the words of those verses. Allah wrote, وَالَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْإِلْمَ دَرَجَةً. Those with knowledge have a certain degree of superiority. Because knowledge is like the light which shines and shows the way which must be taken. In all the cultures which are civilized in the world, whenever things come up, people tend to go to people of knowledge to get clearance, to get to have it clarified, so that they can know what course of action to take. But unfortunately, in some Muslim circles, they've changed the wording of that verse and made it to وَالَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْمَالَ دَرَجَةً. Allah has given a higher degree to those who've got material wealth, which obviously is not the verse. But unfortunately, that is what is practiced in some parts of our community. Little surprise then that Islam is undergoing the situation in which we find it undergoing in the world today. Knowledge is the only thing which can enable us to be 100% sure of the level of truth we have grasped with assured certainty. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَإِنَّهُ لَحَقُّ الْيَقِينِ. Because there are many types of truths, including fake truths, simulated truths, and so on. But it says, حَقُّ الْيَقِينِ, the real sure truth. To have the real sure truth, you require knowledge. What kind of certainty can we imagine? You have certainty of mind or inference, that is, in your mind you've analyzed mentally and you're sure of the particular conclusion you took. You have certainty of sight or perception. It is not an analysis which you did, but you can see, you can feel, you can touch the thing, something. So it is sure that it is there. You have assured certainty, has no human error or psychological defects. And that is the kind of truth which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects us to know. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge encompasses everything. He knows everything better than us. His level of understanding is beyond what we can imagine. So let us understand then that when we read His work, like the religious books, our understanding of it is a very crude deformation of the real message which is being vehicled in that particular case. We are only understanding it at our own level. And you can find many creatures of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who are at a higher level of understanding by virtue of a higher intelligence by virtue of having lived longer, and believe me, I have come across some of the creatures of Allah who not only are they a collective consciousness, unlike us who are individual consciousnesses. A collective consciousness is a body which does not have a single soul in it, but has millions of souls. In other words, that particular body represents a whole race of intelligent beings. I've come across one being like that. Not only is he a collective consciousness of millions of intelligent beings, but this collective consciousness has been alive in our chronology of time for 75 million years. Yes, you heard me right. He's been alive for 75 million years. So in terms of time, in terms of the fact that he has the collective knowledge and intelligence of millions of people to put together, if you combine those two factors, how will you compare his knowledge to what human being can have? Even today, when you start comparing with a computer, for example, ChatGPT, one of these artificial intelligence programs which came out around this time. We're now 1st December 2023. That's when this podcast is being done. And you have ChatGPT 4 has in its training program what the material which was used to train it, or put it in simple words, the book or the material which the computer read in order to develop its experience and knowledge is everything which has been on the internet since the internet began in the 80s up to today. That means all the videos, all the books which have been published on the internet, all the articles of all the millions of newspapers who are publishing online, all the chats between different people, all the explanations, all the various company websites with tons of information on it, and so on and so on and so on and so forth. Now, which human being can compare himself with this kind of volume of knowledge? You see, that is only a computer. So let us understand then that our value does not come from what we have memorized. Our value comes from the fact that we are willing to submit ourselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another way of saying that is we're willing to live our experience in this world by following the universal rules, the universal laws. That is what it means to submit ourselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are certain universal laws which are valid all over the universe. And if we submit ourselves to these rules, then we will be able to act as the Khalifa or the representative, the vicegerent of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here in the world. And then we have a spiritual body. Our conclusion is not just based on pure logic, which is a mental exercise, but we have a spiritual body which can actually have deep understanding, which can take sometimes the form of understanding coming from the mental body or understanding coming from the heart, which you might sometimes call intuition or telepathy when it becomes advanced. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, concerning one of his creatures to whom he had given great knowledge, he says, فَفَهَّمْنَاهَا سُلَيْمَانَ وَكُلًّا آتَيْنَا حُكْمًا وَإِلْمًا. He gave Suleiman understanding. You cannot have knowledge without understanding. So don't just go and memorize something, and that is something which, unfortunately, in Africa, that's how we see things. We do not bother to carry out any kind of research in various disciplines. We wait for others to carry out this research. Then we go and see the results of the research. We memorize them. And then we're given certain pieces of paper, which we call certificates. And then we think that because we have those certificates now, we're entitled to a very comfortable life provided by society. That is not knowledge. Knowledge requires understanding. And Sulaiman alayhi salam was given knowledge. That is why he was vibrating in harmony with the universe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that gave him great insight into justice, even if he did not have a law degree, into wildlife and botany and zoology and biology, even if he was not a doctorate in biology, and a very good control of the financial system. I gathered from some other source that he was actually the guardian of all the riches of the world in his time. Now, there are certain examples which might indicate his wisdom and understanding. During his reign, a few things happened. And let us see the amount of wisdom which Sulaiman alayhi salam had. There was this case of two women who went to put to birth in a center made for that purpose. The hospitals came much later. The word hospital was much later. It was invented by Ibn Sina during about 1,000 years after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we're talking about some kind of medical facility. Now, these women went to put to birth. Unfortunately, the child of one of the women died. And both women started claiming that the child which was alive was theirs and the dead child belonged to the other. Now, we're talking of a time when they could not carry out DNA tests and things of that nature. So this thing, the wrangling went on until it finally came to Sulaiman alayhi salam. Here the two women are there seated. The two children are in front of them, one dead, the other alive. So how do you solve this problem? Sulaiman alayhi salam, he used wisdom. He said to his soldiers, bring my sword. And he really had he was a good actor too, because he made things very believable. He said, bring my sword. They brought his sword. He said, bring the living child. They brought the living child. He said, suspend the child upside down with the feet in the air and open the feet, spread the feet apart, because I'm going to cut the child into two and give each piece to one of the women, since they are all claiming that the child is theirs. No one wants to accept the dead child. So when he raised his sword to cut the child, the real owner, the real mother of the child, jumped and came between Sulaiman alayhi salam and the sword and the child. He said, no, don't cut the child. Give the child to the other woman. And Sulaiman alayhi salam, he told his guards that was the real mother. That was the real mother who prefers to have her child alive and with someone else than to find the child dead. That's an example. When he was just 10 years old, his father Dawuda judged a case where the cattle of somebody came and ransacked and destroyed the harvest of someone else. And Dawuda initially wanted the person, the owner of the farm, to be given the cattle as a compensation for the harvest. Sulaiman alayhi salam was only about 10, sitting in the courtyard. He said, no, Daddy, that is not a very just decision. So Dawud alayhi salam said, oh son, do you have a better judgment? He said, yes, give over the cattle to the farm owner only for one harvest season, and let him be able to feed himself from the cattle and replant his crops from the cattle. When the harvest will come to the same position it was before the cattle came and destroyed it, they should return the cattle to the owner of the cattle, and the person can continue with his farm. And everyone could see that that was the best decision. So Sulaiman alayhi salam was filled with wisdom because he had understanding. So knowledge gives us understanding. Understanding of what? Understanding of who we are, where we come from, why we are here, where we are likely to go. In the process of understanding this, we'll learn about our beloved and one infinite creator of the universe. To acquire this, we use revelation, reason, insight, intuition, as well as conscience. As a matter of fact, knowledge can be acquired in a variety of ways. You can acquire some knowledge from schools and universities, but remember, every time you give someone else the power to decide whether you know something or not, that person will almost always use that power to enslave you, because you will only validate, you will only accept that you know when you know in such a way that it satisfies his agenda. So when I say schools and universities, I don't mean just going blindly following what they tell us there. We've already seen that in Africa, how they falsified our history. Even geography, the map of Africa is downsized in order to give Africa the impression Africa is small. The economics is deformed, so we have African countries do not actually know the rules to follow in order to develop and so on. Nevertheless, if we have that criticism and that we are vigilant, then we might be able to learn something from schools, as long as we don't just swallow everything hook and sinker, and we do our own research. We don't wait for others to come and research and then come and tell us, and we memorize and then wait for some papers to call certificates. We can learn from books. But books, by the way, if you read a book about a war written by the victor, know that the victor has put the events in his favor. If you ask the person who was conquered to write a book, it will not be the same thing like the book written by the victor. So that said, you can understand that most of what we're having in history is not true, because history was always written by the conqueror. And the conqueror always deformed the truth in order to enslave the other people or to appear to be right, even when he was wrong. Nevertheless, with vigilance, we might also discern some things from books, from films, from videos, and documentaries. We can also acquire knowledge from keen observation and interaction with society. By observing what goes on in society, being humble, and following what is happening, we can learn a lot. We can learn from nature and from the universe. Nature is a very big school. Nature itself is a very big library. And if we follow that school, we can acquire far more than we could have acquired from education in schools and things of that nature. Many examples which can be given. How nature is structured, how the things which in nature survive by following the rules of nature rather than dominating nature. A man came to the cocoon of a butterfly which was about to break open for the butterfly to come out. And the butterfly was struggling to open up the cocoon and come out. And this person decided to help the butterfly, he thought, by using his fingers to tear up the cocoon and let the butterfly out. Then he realized that the butterfly fell to the ground and could not fly, and the wings were all twisted. Then he was told by a person specialized, a biologist, that you've just ruined the chances of that butterfly living a normal life. Because in the evolution of the butterfly, all that struggling to open the cocoon was what was required to make blood to flow through all the veins in his wings, so that the wings stretch out fully and he comes out and flies. But you decided to prevent him from making that exercise. You see? At first glance, it appeared as if he was helping the butterfly, but in reality, he ruined the butterfly. So that we can learn a lot when it comes to bringing up our own young ones and everything from that lesson of the butterfly and from many other things in nature. We can also learn from trials and experience by doing things ourselves. That's actually the best way. We can learn by thinking and meditation. We quiet the mind, get all the thoughts out, and we're ready to receive thoughts from higher levels, which can bring us things which we couldn't think of by ourselves. We can also acquire knowledge by listening to the inner voice within us. We can also acquire knowledge from extra-dimensional sources and even from off-world entities through telepathic links and many other methods. We can acquire knowledge sometimes through dreams. And dreams, I'm not talking about spiritual knowledge. You see, there was a time when in chemistry, in organic chemistry, they did not know that you could have an organic chemistry, a chemical compound, which had a ring structure. They were always putting straight chain structures. So then they came onto a chemical called benzene. And when they tried to represent it as a straight chain hydrocarbon, they couldn't get the number of hydrogen and carbon atoms right. They thought, and one of the chemists who was thinking about it was a person called Kekule. I think it was a German chemist. So Kekule now had a dream where he saw some snakes playing about, and one of the snakes bit its own tail. So Kekule woke up from the dream and understood that you can have circular hydrocarbons, not only straight-chained. And that initially solved the great puzzle. And benzene was represented as cyclohexane 1,3,5-triene. That turned out not to be very accurate, but at least was far better than the straight chains they were trying to use. So you see, even non-theological knowledge can be obtained from dreams. And these various methods of acquiring knowledge will enable us to be the best of ourselves. Our success is not in isolation, but intertwined with the lives of everybody else. We are all linked, we are all one. So we understand that we have to harmonize our lives with the rest of the creation and follow the universal laws. That is how things succeed in life. If you ask yourself, why does water fall from the mountain to the valley? Because it is respecting a law of something called minimum potential energy. Why is a drop spherical in shape? Because that's when the surface tension forces gives minimum potential energy. So next time you turn on your light, know that they were able to produce electricity from the waterfall because the potential energy which existed in this water, which is also a creature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, was prostrating itself. It was going to the lowest value. And on passing to go down the valley, human beings put turbines on its path so that in passing it can turn the turbines. If potential energy refused to prostrate, where would you get the electricity from? You see? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us, وَلِلَّهِ يَسْجُدُ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ طَوْعًا وَكَرْهًا وَظِلَالُهُم بِالْغُدُوِّ وَالْآصَالِ. Unto Allah prostrates all that is in the heavens and the earth, willingly or unwillingly, just like their shadows do in the morning and evening. Why the shadows? Why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking about the shadows? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that everything, everybody in the whole universe prostrates to Him, meaning they live according to the universal laws, willingly or unwillingly. What does that mean? That means on certain aspects, we are given the choice to choose either to do or not to do. We can, for example, decide to help somebody or not help that person. But we cannot decide to not be born, for example, or not die. That is not within our control. And the second part of willingly and unwillingly is that of those things which we do, which are against universal law, whether we like it or not, we will get the return, negative return unto us for that violation of universal law. Whether we like it or not, it's going to come. Some of our Eastern brothers, they call it karma. So everybody then prostrates to Allah willingly or unwillingly. Even those who think they are arrogant, they don't want to prostrate, and then they start violating all the universal laws, the effect will come on them and they will yield. They will prostrate to that decision which has come onto them as a result of they having violated the universal law. So you see, everybody has to yield. I've already given you the example of the waterfall. Now let's consider perfume. There is something called the law of distribution, of diffusion. The law of diffusion stipulates that when you have the partial pressure of any particular entity inside a gas, if the partial pressure of any particular gas inside a gas mixture is higher in one region than another, then there's a certain pressure which makes that particular gas to diffuse and go toward the area where the partial pressure is lower. In other words, if you open a bottle of perfume at one corner of a room, because the concentration of perfume molecules is very high in that area, there is a strong partial pressure which will make the perfume molecules to diffuse to the rest of the room, and so you can now smell the perfume all over. That is the natural law. Now, let us come to human beings. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not give a high concentration of perfume, but say a high concentration of money to somebody, and then puts him inside a population where some other people somewhere, the other angle, they don't have enough, will he follow the natural law and allow that money to diffuse so that everybody can have a share? Or will he try to prevent the natural law? You see? That's how we do. So, these laws are natural. Charity is a natural thing. Just like the perfume is charitable. When it sees that one part of the room is very poor in it, it migrates to that part and makes every part of the room to have the smell. So, those ahead on the knowledge side must be willing to help those who are lagging behind as far as knowledge is concerned. That is charity. Having said that, and having given the general definition of what knowledge is, let us go to some specifics. You see, I once took part in a certain seminar done by university students some 20 years ago in Gandhara University. And this issue of knowledge was a problem since then. So a commission was set up to try and see what Muslims should do in order to acquire more knowledge. And as soon as I went to those, I sat with those our children who were university students at the time, immediately turned out that what knowledge is was not clear. Some said Islamic knowledge means memorizing a lot of hadiths and verses of the Qur'an. Some say Islamic knowledge means you have to know fiqh and know the rules of prayer. They are, in short, rituals and how the rituals are supposed to be done. Some say, no, Islamic knowledge means knowing Tawhid. And you see all kinds of deformities. So I'd like us to consider what the Almighty Creator Himself thinks of knowledge and accept His decision or His definition. Because the definitions were given is there are different groups and factions fighting for their interests. It's very simple. If knowledge is accepted to be, for example, the Qur'an memorized, immediately all those who have specialized in that particular domain suddenly will have an easy life because they will be considered to be the knowledgeable ones in the community. Resources will go to keep for their upkeeping and so on and so forth. So the struggle to influence the definition also has certain undertones of service to self. So let us see what the Almighty Allah Himself talks about knowledge. And to see that, we have to go to the 35th Surah, that is Surah Al-Fatir, from verse 27 to 28. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says this, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألم تر أن الله أنزل من السماء ماء فأخرجنا به ثمرات مختلفا ألوانها ومن الجبال جدد بيض وحمر مختلف ألوانها وغرابيب سود ومن الناس والدواب والأنعام مختلف ألوانه كذلك إنما يخشى الله من عباده العلماء إن الله عزيز غفور. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, have you not seen how He makes water to come down from the sky and makes different types of fruits to come out according to their species? مختلف ألوانها. The different colors here represent different species. And in the mountains you have different strata of rocks which are white, red, and some of them extremely black. There are also differences among people, animals, both domestic and wild animals. Amongst His servants, only the knowledgeable can truly fear Him. Allah is certainly powerful and often forgiving. Now, let us look at this verse very carefully. He starts by, do you not see? Do you not see doesn't mean to just stand and look with the eyes. It means to analyze, calculate, study. How He sends water from the sky. Needless to say that the water cycle itself was discovered thanks to verses like this in the Qur'an, in history. I did a calculation once with my students whom I teach at home to calculate the amount of water which can fall on the surface area of Cameroon alone over a 5-minute period during a torrential rain. And the calculations revealed that that particular volume of water, if it had to be produced from seawater, by desalinating seawater, then would have required the budget of the entire country over 2,000 years. That is the amount of money required just to produce that volume of water from seawater. Now, if you add to the fact that it has to be carried up to 15 kilometers into the air and distributed all over, so that every creature, including ants who don't have any post box number, receive their share, they just have to look at these parcel delivery companies, how much they charge for a small thing less than 500 grams, to understand how much that will come out to. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is calling our attention to this miracle, how He's making this distribution so seamlessly. It's a real miracle. This water comes down from the sky, irrigates the land, and different crops come out. The orange tree receives the water and produces oranges. The mango tree receives the same water and produces mangoes. The pineapple plant receives the same water and produces pineapples. That in itself is a miracle. Now, I ask my students, if you went to any university in the world and you wanted to find out which teacher can tell you enough details about the about rain and the water cycle, so that you can see the greatness of Allah in that particular phenomenon, which teacher would you approach? Some said teacher of geography, I said yes. Others said teacher of meteorology, I said yes. Others said teachers of climatology, I said yes. Now the second one, which talks about the different types of plants, which teacher will you approach? Some say teachers of botany, I say yes. Biology, I say yes. Even geography, I say yes. So we see then that in order to be able to understand or to see the might of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is within this phenomenon, and see His greatness, we need the knowledge of meteorology, geography, climatology, and of course supporting sciences like chemistry, physics, and mathematics, and computer science. To be able to understand the plants, we need biology, zoology, botany. To understand the various differences in rock strata and their colors, we need geophysics and geology. To understand the differences between animals and domestic and wild, we need biology, zoology, medicine. And of course, all of this should all be woven together with good knowledge of the oneness of Allah in Tawhid, the fiqh, which has been brought up over the ages, and many other disciplines which has to do with ritual. At the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاءِ. In the end, Allah says, can only fear Him truly those of His servants who have knowledge. What knowledge is He talking about? He's talking about the knowledge of geography, geology, climatology, mathematics, physics, chemistry, computer science, and so on and so on and so forth. I sometimes ask some of my students, I say, now, imagine somebody who is living in the quarter and doesn't know very much about the religious jurisprudence. And somebody died, living on a estate which has shareholders, which is shares in different companies, construction projects which are halfway through, houses, different types of businesses, dealing with different types of merchandise, money in the bank, and so on. And they have to share the inheritance. And you have two people who are vying to have the task, to be appointed to do this task. One of them has learned at the local level enough jurisprudence. But unfortunately, that's the only thing he learned, with rules of ritual, like fiqh and so on. The other person knows very little jurisprudence, but is a computer scientist. Now I ask, who of the two will do a better job? The person who learned a bit of jurisprudence in the quarter will use his little knowledge, and what is he going to say when he talks of shares of companies? What is he going to say when he have to give material evaluation and a material accounting? What is he going to say when you talk of how to amortize property? How to make the property to grade it as to value the property with time. I've forgotten the accounting word for that. How will you be able to divide a lorry and a house? When sometimes you say, the verse says, give half to this person and 1/4 to that, and you say to the person, if you give half and 1/4, what is left? Even though arithmetic even is not there. That is why, in this particular case, the computer scientist wouldn't even dabble with this thing. He will go straight either to, and there are applications which can do this, where the greatest specialists of this worldwide have accepted that their knowledge be put into an application or a computer program, which can now be assessed by the computer programmer. And he will be able to do a much better job than the other person who has a small knowledge of jurisprudence. So you see, in this particular case, computer science would have been more useful in the practice of the day-to-day practice of Islam than the knowledge of jurisprudence. But for some reason, or for reasons of self-interest, many Muslim scholars refuse to acknowledge the validity of the computer programmer as an Islamic scholar. And that is the problem. And makes the Muslim community to lag behind on several sectors. It makes the Muslim community to be the underdog. We always sometimes quote that the Prophet ﷺ was illiterate for our own interests. Let us see just how illiterate he was. I've already mentioned that whenever Muslims were attacked with any kind of weapon, they met the Muslims defending themselves with the same types of weapons, be they swords, bows and arrows and things, which they made themselves. If we were to follow the same logic, then if a Muslim country is attacked today with fighter jets, missiles, nuclear submarines and nuclear aircraft carriers and so on, they should meet the Muslim country with those same weapons which they made themselves. And to do that, you require mathematics, you require physics, chemistry, you require computer science, you require material science, you require all those things. Meaning then that as long as we accept that those things are indispensable for the proper practice of Islam, they are thus part of Islamic knowledge. I've always given people this dilemma. Say when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ayyawma akmaltu lakum dinakum wa atmamtu alaykum ni'mati. Today, I have completed your religion for you. I've completed your religion for you and brought an end to my favor unto you, and chosen for you waraditu lakum Islam Adina, chosen for you Islam. So Allah says He has completed the religion. Now we've just seen that we require computer science to make religion to go ahead if we are to compete favorably. So some people who are arguing that computer science is not part of Islam are therefore saying that Allah has not completed Islam, but that you require Islam plus computer science and chemistry and all other things which are not Islam to make Islam complete, meaning that Allah did not make it complete. But Allah is saying He has completed His religion. So who is right? Allah or those scholars who are trying to narrow down the definition of what is Islamic knowledge for their own self-interest? It's for you, the public, to think. They say that the Prophet ﷺ was illiterate. We should not mistake formal education and being uneducated. Educated doesn't necessarily mean you went to a school. You can acquire quite a lot. Why do people say that those who have traveled a lot are usually very aware, open-minded? That's because traveling itself is a school. Even if nobody has given them a certificate, they know a lot, just by virtue of having traveled and got experience here and there. Now, the scholars who defended Islam, like Ibn Sina, who was born in 980 years in the Christian era and died 1037 years in the Christian era. At the age of 10, he had memorized the Qur'an, meaning that his diet and the type of food the parents were giving him were very equilibrated, otherwise the brain could not have functioned so accurately. At 16, he was already a medical doctor. Well, at that time, the amount of medical knowledge was much smaller than now. He wrote 456 books in Arabic and 23 in Persian. Remember, Arabic at the time was like English today, the language of the world. Now, you see, it is because scholars were like this that Islam was dominating the world. Al-Razi, from 865 AD to 925 AD, he too wrote 230 books in medicine, theology and philosophy. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Battle of Badr, after asking a Bedouin how many camels were slaughtered by the Quraysh army, he got the figure for 2 days, yesterday and today, for example, and he used that figure with statistical information he had concerning the nutrition of Arabs and so on, to calculate that the Quraysh army was between 950 and 1,050 soldiers. Isn't that mathematics? But because he did not have a mathematics degree, it means he was ignorant. I defy you to go into a certain market and ask how many bags of rice were bought from the market, and then calculate the number of customers who came in just from that, to see if your level of mathematics is up to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we see that today, those who are making inroads and making a lot of effort to expose and promote the religion are those who have acquired knowledge outside what is being considered to be the pure Islamic knowledge. You have people like Zakir Naik, Yusuf Estes, who went to Germany. Zakir Naik, by the way, did medicine in school. Yusuf Estes was a pastor who converted to Islam. He went to Germany and made a conference, and 2,500 people on the spot joined Islam. You have Khalid Yassin, Sheikh Khalid Yassin, who studied sociology up to doctorate level in university. You have the person who created this organization called IIT, International Institute of Islamic Thinking, which is training Muslim executives. He was an electromechanical engineer trained in Britain. So we see generally that if the Muslims can re-embrace all the branches of knowledge which we require, then Islam is going to reach another golden age, and humanity will be able to live in peace. Enslavement using the financial system and the monetary system, which is done because they have abandoned the Islamic monetary system, will no longer happen. The international pharmaceutical mafia, which is taking advantage to enslave the world population, will no longer be able to do that. The political mayhem, which is happening in the world, where they're imposing so-called democracy in Africa because they can use their money to influence who becomes president, will no longer happen. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us and make us to come up to our mark. Khairu kalam ma kala wadalla. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.